Let's start with something most people get completely backwards. When we think about how a narcissist expresses love, if we can even call it that, we picture grand gestures, compliments, charm, the love-bombing phase everyone warns you about. But that's not where his attachment actually begins. That's just the performance layer, the part designed for consumption. The real signal, the one almost nobody catches, happens before any of that. It happens in silence, in observation. A narcissist studies you, not the way a curious partner studies you, trying to understand your inner world so he can support it. He studies you the way a strategist studies terrain. What makes you flinch? What makes you soften? Which words land and which ones bounce off? He's not doing this to know you. He's doing this to know how to move you. And here's the part that will unsettle you. In his internal architecture, that obsessive cataloging, that's as close to devotion as he gets. Think about what attention actually costs a narcissist. His entire psychological system is organized around himself, his image, his supply, his need to be the center of gravity in any room he enters. So when he redirects that finite attentional resource onto you, when he starts memorizing your coffee order, your triggers, the exact tone you use when you're round, upset versus when you're just tired, that's not idle curiosity. That's expenditure. That's cost. And a narcissist does not spend what he has freely. This is where most people misread the entire dynamic. They're waiting for words. They want to hear "I love you" and have it mean what it means in a securely attached relationship, an offering, a vulnerability, a bridge being built. But for a narcissist, the words are cheap. Words cost nothing. Watching costs something. And so watching becomes the confession he can't make out loud. You'll notice it in small, almost eerie moments. He'll reference something you said weeks ago that you'd forgotten you even said. He'll know your patterns better than your closest friends do. He'll anticipate your mood before you've even recognized it yourself. And if you're someone with a trauma history, someone who equates being seen with being safe, this can feel intoxicating. It can feel like the deepest intimacy you've ever experienced. But here's the distinction that matters, the one that will protect you. Being studied is not the same as being known. A narcissist's observation isn't in service of your well-being. It's in service of his access. He's not learning you so he can meet your needs. He's learning you so he knows exactly which lever to pull, and when. The attention is real. The intention behind it is where the danger lives. This is the paradox you have to sit with. The very thing that feels like proof of love, being seen that closely, that completely, is often the earliest infrastructure of control. He's not falling for you in the way you understand falling. He's building a map. And whether that map gets used to love you or to manage you depends entirely on what happens next. Because watching is only the first move. What he does with everything he's learned, that's where his nature reveals itself completely. So he's built the map. He knows your patterns, your soft spots, the terrain of who you are. What happens next is where things start to feel less like attention and more like ownership. Watch what happens the first time you mention a close friend he hasn't fully vetted. Watch his face when you talk about a promotion, a trip you're taking without him, a version of your life that doesn't include his input. Most people call this jealousy and leave it there. But jealousy, in its ordinary human form, is about fear of loss. What you're watching in a narcissist is something colder. It's territorial. Here's the distinction that matters. A securely attached person feels threatened when they sense you slipping away. A narcissist feels threatened when he senses you existing independently, full stop. Those are not the same wound. One is about connection. The other is about control. And control, for a narcissist, is the closest substitute he has for the intimacy he's not fully capable of generating on his own. This is why possessiveness shows up in places that don't make sense if you're looking for logic. He's not just uncomfortable with a rival. He's uncomfortable with your book club, your late nights with your sister, the parts of your identity that existed before he arrived and will keep existing whether he stays or not. Because in his internal framework, anything that belongs fully to you and not to him is a leak, a place where his supply might be quietly draining out. And here's where it gets philosophically strange, because this possessiveness will often get misread as passion. Someone who didn't care wouldn't notice you talking to your ex at a party. Someone who didn't care wouldn't ask, again, who you were texting. So the mind does what it does with ambiguous data. It fills the gap with the most flattering explanation available. He must love me. That's why he can't stand to share me. But love, in its healthy form, does not require ownership to feel secure. Love can watch you walk into a room full of other people and stay calm, because it's rooted in trust, not surveillance. What you're witnessing instead is a nervous system that has fused mine with safe. If you are fully his time, his attention, his approval, as the only approval that registers, then he doesn't have to confront the terrifying possibility that you might choose, freely, to leave. This is the cruel irony sitting underneath all of it. The very same possessiveness that can feel like devotion is actually a narcissist way of managing his own fear of abandonment, without ever having to say the words, "I'm afraid of losing you." Vulnerability like that would require him to admit need, and admitting need means admitting he isn't the self-sufficient, untouchable figure he's spent a lifetime constructing. So instead, the fear gets rerouted. It doesn't come out as, "Please don't leave me." It comes out as control, dressed up as concern, jealousy, dressed up as care, possession, standing in for the one sentence he can't bring himself to speak. He isn't holding on to you because he trusts what you have together. He's holding on because losing you would mean losing the only place he's ever let himself need someone somewheres. So he's mapped you. He's marked you as his. Now comes the part that will feel the most confusing, because it looks nothing like love and everything like sabotage. He starts testing you, and most people fail to recognize a test even while they're taking it. Here's what it looks like in practice. Everything is calm, connected, maybe even good, and then, without warning, he pulls away, goes cold, picks a fight over something that, a week earlier, wouldn't have registered as a problem at all. You're left scrambling, trying to figure out what you did wrong, when the honest answer is, nothing. You didn't do anything. You became the subject of an experiment you never agreed to run. This is push-pull behavior, and it is rarely random, even when it feels chaotic from the outside. Underneath it is a question the narcissist cannot ask directly, because asking it would require an admission of need he's not built to make. The question is simple. Will you stay if I make this hard? Will you stay if I stop being easy to love? Understand what's happening physiologically here, because this is where it gets interesting. For most people, conflict and distance are risks to be minimized. We're wired to repair, to move towards safety in a relationship. But a narcissist's nervous system runs on a different circuit. Instability doesn't just happen to him. He manufactures it, because instability generates data. Your reaction to the storm becomes information about your loyalty. If you fight to stay, if you chase, if you tolerate the coldness and remain anyway, in his mind, you've passed something. You've proven a devotion he could never trust if he simply asked for it outright. This is the piece that trips people up the most. Why would testing loyalty ever feel like intimacy to him? Because trust, for a narcissist, isn't built through vulnerability the way it is for most people. It's built through survival. If you survive the test, you become proof. Proof that you won't leave the way everyone else eventually did. Proof that his worst behavior didn't scare you off. And proof is the only currency his defended, hypervigilant nervous system actually believes. But here's what he can't see, or won't let himself see. Every test corrodes the very thing he's testing for. Real closeness isn't manufactured through conflict and reconciliation cycles. It's built through consistency, the boring, unglamorous kind of safety that doesn't require anyone to prove anything at all. What he's doing instead is running the relationship through a stress test it was never designed to survive indefinitely. Something eventually breaks. Sometimes it's you. Sometimes, ironically, it's whatever fragile trust he had actually managed to build. And this is the deeper tragedy underneath the pattern. He's not testing you because he doubts your love. He's testing you because he's never learned another way to know if love is real. Real trust, the kind that doesn't need to be proven, only felt, has always been foreign territory to him. So he does the only thing his wiring knows how to do. He manufactures the fire, just to see if you'll still be standing there once the smoke clears. He isn't testing whether you love him. He's testing whether he's finally allowed to believe it. So the tests keep coming, and somewhere in the middle of all that instability, something else starts to surface, something he never planned to show you. This is where we get to the ugliest part of the pattern, and paradoxically, the most revealing. The rage. The jealousy that turns venomous. The controlling outbursts that seem to come out of nowhere and land somewhere far past reasonable. Most people watch this and draw the obvious conclusion. This is who he really is. and everything before it was the mask. But I want to offer you a harder, more uncomfortable truth. That ugly moment you just witnessed, the one that scared you, the one that made you question everything, that's often not the absence of attachment. It's the evidence of it. Here's why. A narcissist's entire public self is a construction project. Years of engineering have gone into the version of him that charms rooms, controls first impressions, performs competence and calm. That mask is expensive to maintain, and he does not drop it for just anyone. Strangers get the polished version. Co-workers get the polished version. The people who don't matter to his internal economy never see the wiring underneath the performance. But you did, and that should tell you something, even though it doesn't feel like a gift in the moment. When the mask comes off, when the rage spills out, when the jealousy turns into something controlling and dark, you are looking at the raw, unregulated machinery he normally keeps hidden from the world. That machinery only surfaces around people he's stopped performing for. And the reason he's stopped performing isn't indifference. It's the opposite. Somewhere in his defended, hypervigilant nervous system, you've been reclassified from audience to something closer to necessity. He doesn't manage his worst impulses around you the way he manages them around a boss or a stranger, because some part of him has already gambled that you won't fully leave. This is not a defense of the behavior. Let's be precise about that. Rage is still rage. Control is still control. The damage it does to you is real, regardless of what it reveals about him. But understanding the mechanism matters, because it explains something that confuses almost everyone caught in this dynamic. Why does he seem to save his worst self for the person he claims to care about most? The answer is that the mask was never built for you. It was built for the world. And underneath that performance is a person who was never taught how need and fear translate into anything other than control. When he feels threatened by your independence, by the possibility of losing you, by anything that touches the fault line of his abandonment fear, the sophisticated version of him goes offline, and what's left is unfiltered and often frightening. So here's the paradox you have to hold in both hands at once. The ugliness is proof he's stopped performing, and stopping the performance, for a narcissist, is as close as he gets to intimacy. That doesn't make the moment safe. It doesn't make it excusable. But it does explain why it happens with you, and almost nowhere else. He shows you his worst self, not because you matter least, but because, in his broken arithmetic, you're the only one he trusts enough to stop pretending for eventually. Something happens that seems to end the story. He leaves, or he pushes you far enough that you leave. Either way, there's a door that closes, and for a while, silence follows. And then, weeks later, sometimes months, he's back. A text that means nothing on the surface. A like on a photo from 3 years ago. Just thinking about you, that arrives with no context and no explanation. Most people try to decode this as strategy. What they're actually looking at is withdrawal. Here's the piece almost nobody understands about a narcissist's disappearance and return. It was never really about you in the way heartbreak usually is. When he left, or when he let you leave, something in his system lost access to a source it had come to depend on. Your attention, your validation, the particular way you made him feel regulated, admired, in control. That's not romantic longing in the conventional sense. That's a nervous system registering the loss of supply, and supply withdrawal has its own gravity. Think about what dependency actually does to behavior. It doesn't announce itself with reason. It resurfaces at inconvenient moments, uninvited, often against the person's own stated intentions. He may have told himself, and told you, that this is over. He may genuinely believe it in the moment he says it. But belief and biology are not the same thing, and for someone whose sense of self has been propped up by external validation for most of his life, the absence of that validation creates a pull he doesn't fully understand and rarely questions. So he comes back. Not because he's worked anything out, not because he's ready to offer something different. He comes back because some part of him still remembers what it felt like to have access to you, and the remembering is stronger than his resolve to stay away. This is where I need you to hear something carefully, because it's easy to romanticize this pattern. The return is not evidence of growth. It's not evidence that distance made him realize what he lost in the way it would for someone securely attached, someone capable of genuine reflection and repair. It's evidence that his system hasn't finished metabolizing the loss of a resource it had gotten used to. You weren't missed the way a person misses a partner. You were missed the way a system misses equilibrium. And here's the trap hidden inside all of it. Every time he reappears, and every time you respond, you're not just reopening a door, you're reconfirming something to his nervous system that it desperately wants confirmed. That the supply is still reachable, still available, still willing to answer when called. That confirmation doesn't heal anything. It resets the clock on a pattern that was never resolved in the first place. This is why breadcrumbing feels so disorienting from the outside. It looks like longing. It looks like he can't live without you. And in a strange, uncomfortable way, that's almost true. Just not in the way you'd hope. He can't live without what you gave him. Whether he can live without you, specifically, as a whole person with needs of your own, has never actually been tested. He didn't come back because he healed. He came back because the silence got louder than his pride mutter. Now let's talk about what he offers you while he's actually present, because this is where people go looking for proof of love in all the wrong places. They wait for emotional vulnerability, soft confessions, the kind of openness therapists talk about when they describe real intimacy, and when that doesn't come, they assume nothing real is being offered at all. But there's a different currency changing hands here, and if you know what to look for, it tells you everything. Watch what he lets you see, not what he tells you, what he lets you witness. The unfiltered opinion he'd never say in a room full of people. The version of him at midnight, when the performance has worn thin and the words come out rawer than usual. The chaos he's usually careful to keep hidden behind competence and control. This is access. And for a narcissist, access is the closest thing he has to emotional currency. Here's why this matters so much. Everything about a narcissist's public presentation is curated. Every room he walks into gets a version of him that's been calibrated for maximum effect. Charm where charm works, authority where authority works, vulnerability only when vulnerability serves the performance. That curation is constant, and it is exhausting to maintain. So when he lets it drop, when he gives you the late-night call that isn't strategic, the unedited reaction, the glimpse into whatever mess he's usually careful to conceal, that's not nothing. That's a withdrawal from a very carefully guarded account. Most people don't recognize this as intimacy, because it doesn't come wrapped in the language they were taught to expect. They're listening for "I trust you." What they're actually being given is something quieter and, in its own way, more honest. "I'm not performing for you right now." And for someone who has spent a lifetime performing, that absence of performance is as close to trust as his architecture allows. But here's where I need you to slow down, because this is the distinction that protects you. Access is not the same as respect. Being let into his chaos doesn't mean he's asking what your chaos looks like. Being given the unfiltered version of him doesn't mean he's curious about the unfiltered version of you. Access, in this dynamic, tends to flow one direction. He opens a door and calls it closeness. But closeness, in its healthy form, is reciprocal. Two people building shared vulnerability, not one person granting occasional entry into a room he still fully controls. This is why access can feel so intoxicating and still leave you hungry. You're getting something real. His guard actually does come down. The walls actually do move, but you're getting it on his terms, at his hours, in the specific rooms he's chosen to unlock. It's intimacy, shaped entirely around his comfort, not built through mutual exposure. So when you find yourself thinking, "He doesn't let anyone else see him like this," notice that the sentence proves something, and disproves something at the same time. It proves you occupy a category no one else does in his internal hierarchy. It disproves the idea that this access will ever grow into something equal, something that asks as much of him as it gives. He isn't handing you his heart. He's handing you a key. And a key only tells you which rooms he's willing to let you enter, not whether he's willing to walk through any of yours. Here's the moment that confuses people more than almost anything else in this pattern. Things are good. Genuinely good. The chaos has settled. The tests have quieted. The access feels steady instead of sporadic. And that's precisely when he blows it up. Not during a fight. Not during a rough patch where sabotage would at least make narrative sense. He does it when things are calm. When the relationship has finally found its footing. He picks a fight out of nothing. He disappears for 3 days with no explanation. He says something cruel enough to fracture the trust you'd both just started to build. And you're left staring at the wreckage, thinking, "We were fine. Why would he do this now?" The honest answer is that fine was the problem. Stability, for most people, is the goal. It's what you build toward. But for a narcissist, stability isn't relief, it's exposure. Because stability means the relationship has stopped being a performance and started being something real. It means he's no longer managing you from a safe, curated distance. It means he might actually need you. And need, to a nervous system organized entirely around self-sufficiency and control, is the single most dangerous thing it can register. This is the paradox sitting at the center of everything we've covered tonight. Every mechanism we've talked about, the possessiveness, the testing, the mask slipping, the breadcrumbing, the guarded access, all of it exists to keep intimacy at a manageable distance, close enough to feel the reward, far enough to avoid the risk. And when a relationship becomes stable enough to close that distance completely, his entire defensive architecture reads it as a 5-alarm fire. So he does what his system has always done when danger spikes. He creates an exit. Not necessarily a full exit, often just enough distance to restore the gap he needs to feel safe. Again, sabotage, in this light, isn't self-destruction in the way we normally understand it. It's self-preservation. It's a nervous system pulling the emergency brake right as the car finally started running, smoothly, because smooth was never the environment it learned to survive in. Here's what makes this so tragic, if you're willing to sit with it. Somewhere underneath the defense mechanisms, he wants the stability. He wants to be truly seen, truly chosen, truly needed in return. That want is real, but it's buried under a much older, much louder alarm that equates being fully known with being fully exposed. And exposure, for someone whose entire identity was built to avoid vulnerability, feels indistinguishable from danger. So he sabotages the very thing he's been quietly seeking this whole time. Not because he doesn't want it, because he's never learned how to tolerate having it. And this is the piece that will change how you see this entire pattern, if you let it. Every one of these 8 signs, the watching, the possessiveness, the testing, the mask slipping, the breadcrumbing, the access, the sabotage, they're not separate behaviors. They're the same wound, wearing different clothes. A person terrified of being truly known, doing everything in his power to be close to you without ever risking the one thing closeness requires. He doesn't destroy the good moments because he doesn't want them. He destroys them because, for the first time, they made him want to stay cert. There's one last thing I want you to notice, because once you see it, you'll never unsee it. It's quieter than the rage, subtler than the possessiveness, and it doesn't announce itself the way the other patterns do. It's memory. He'll bring up something you mentioned once, in passing, months ago, a fear you named half-jokingly, a detail about your childhood you barely remember sharing. Sometimes he uses it to comfort you, in a moment so precisely timed it stuns you into thinking, he really does see me. And sometimes he uses it the opposite way, as ammunition, pulled out at exactly the moment it will do the most damage. Same memory. 2 completely different weapons. Most people focus on which version they'd rise, the comfort or the cruelty, and miss the thing that actually matters. The memory itself is the tell, because narcissists do not retain detail about people who don't matter to them. Attention is finite, even for someone whose attention is organized almost entirely around himself. If he's still carrying a sentence you said a year ago, filed away and ready to be retrieved, that's not incidental. That's storage. And storage requires value. Here's what makes this the most complicated sign of all, the one that ties every other point in this speech together. That same memory can function as a shrine and a weapon, sometimes within the same week, sometimes within the same conversation. He remembers because some part of him has genuinely archived you as significant. But significance, in his architecture, was never guaranteed to translate into tenderness. It only guarantees relevance. And relevance can be used to build you up or take you apart, depending entirely on what he needs from the interaction in that moment. This is the final, uncomfortable truth I want to leave you with tonight. Every pattern we've walked through, the studying, the possessiveness, the testing, the mask slipping, the disappearing and returning, the guarded access, the sabotage at the exact moment things got good, and now this. The memory that cuts both ways. None of it was random. None of it was the absence of feeling. It was feeling, filtered through a system that was never taught how to hold closeness without also needing to control it. And that's the distinction that matters more than anything else here. Recognizing these signs was never about deciding whether a narcissist is capable of something resembling attachment. He is. What we've spent this time mapping is proof of that. The real question, the one only you can answer, and the one that actually determines your future, is whether attachment filtered through control, through testing, through weaponized memory and guarded access, is something you're willing to keep calling love. Because here's what I want you to walk away with. Being studied, being remembered, being fought for in these strange and painful ways. None of that is the same as being safe. And safety, not intensity, is what real love was always supposed to feel like. If what you've been calling love has left you constantly decoding, constantly earning, constantly bracing for the version of him you'll get today, that isn't a love story. That's a survival strategy you've mistaken for one. He may remember everything you ever told him, but the question that actually matters is whether you remember what you deserve matters. Most people wait for a narcissist to say I love you, the way they've always understood those words. But that's not where his attachment actually lives. It lives in the things he never says out loud. It starts with the watching. He studies you, your patterns, your triggers, the things that make you soften, not to know you, but to know how to move you. Watching costs him something. It's the closest thing to devotion he has. Then comes the possessiveness. Not because he trusts what you have, because losing you would mean admitting he needs someone. Then the tests, the push-pull, the sudden cold. He's not doubting your love. He's checking if he's finally allowed to believe it. Then the mask slips. The rage, the ugliness. He doesn't show you his worst self because you matter least. He shows you because he's stopped performing. And stopping is the closest he gets to trust. He disappears. He comes back. Not because he healed, because the silence got louder than his pride. He gives you access no one else gets. The unfiltered version, the midnight chaos. It's real. It's just never equal. And right when things get good, genuinely good, he sabotages it. Because stability doesn't feel like safety to him. It feels like exposure. Last of all, he remembers everything. Every detail you forgot you shared. Sometimes it comforts you. Sometimes it cuts you. Either way, it proves you mattered. None of this is the absence of feeling. It's feeling, filtered through a system that never learned how to hold closeness without controlling it. He may remember everything you told him. The real question is whether you remember what you deserve.